Idle No More is an ongoing protest among the Aboriginal peoples in Canada, comprising the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and their non-Aboriginal supporters. It's a reaction to alleged abuses of Indigenous treaty rights by our federal government. The movement addresses Bill C-45 directly. Idle No More resists the current government policies in a peaceful and respectful manner. Manifesto, an article written by Jessica Gordon which was taken straight off the Idle No More website, states the following. The treaties are agreements that cannot be altered or broken by one side of the two nations. The spirit and intent of the treaty agreement meant that the First Nations people would share the land but retain their inherent rights to land and resources. Instead, First Nations have experienced a history of colonization which has resulted in outstanding land claims, lack of resources, and unequal funding for services such as education and housing. Currently, this government is trying to pass many laws so that reserve lands can also be bought and sold by big companies to get profit from resources. We will be left with nothing but poisoned water, land, and air. This is an attempt to take away sovereignty and the inherent right to land and resources from First Nations people. We will also be talking about the White Paper, a policy document proposed in 1969 by Minister of Indian Affairs Jean Chrétien. Mundane Politics will talk about Aboriginals in Canada. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and comment your own views.
Good afternoon and welcome to Mundane Politics. Today with me I have Rajan Anderson, Lane Carter, Sahad Kassam, and Garrison McCleary. Welcome guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. So today we'll be talking about Aboriginal issues, and I just want to start it off with the Canadian government, with our history and our time right now. Do you think that we have caused Aboriginal communities to revolt against us?
I don't think it's this parliament, this specific parliament, has caused Aboriginal peoples to revolt, which against them. It's been a process that's been ongoing for 300 years. The assimilation and the denial of rights to these people has made them revolt. Revolt. I don't really like the word revolt, but it's essentially that's what's driving them to do Idle No More, to unassimilate.
And it's not the aspect of, as you were saying, it's revolting. It's the aspect that people they're finally standing up and demanding the rights that were given to them by the government, by the British government when they signed those treaties,
yeah.
That have not been granted to them for hundreds of years.
The Royal Charter goes through 4 stages of the Royal Charter, I should say, was on Indigenous people or something around that name. Was created after things like the Meech Lake Accord and OCA, and it basically outlined what the thought that the Canadian government should do. And there's several great suggestions in there that I fail to realize why the government has not gone through with this.
I think this movement originated with the hopes that history would not be allowed to repeat itself, and with the Grassy Narrows logging blockade. And so the story is of heavily logged area that was polluting the rivers, and this is primarily Idle No More's platform on the environmental aspect. Is these rivers are providing food sources and drinking water for many of these Aboriginal, some of whom do not even have running water. So this is they rely on this for their survival, and these are being polluted. And so this movement, I think, is to hold the government accountable not only to things that it said that the Aboriginals would have in the past, but also to things that it is trying to do, wrongs that it is trying to commit in the present, which is unthinkable.
I think it's completely delusional to believe that Aboriginal assimilation by the government has stopped at this point in time. It certainly didn't stop with the ending of the last residential school in '91. It will have stopped when the Aboriginal people have reclaimed their heritage, reclaimed their rights as peoples and as nations. It's not something like the Holocaust where the mass Hitler was defeated. Hitler, as a metaphor, has not been defeated by Aboriginal interest groups as of yet.
So, do you guys believe that a process of unassimilation is necessary?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that it needs to start, first of all, with the education of Aboriginal children. Because you look at, we now have had hundreds of years of generational abuse that has happened by the government against the Aboriginal people. They've been oppressed beyond belief, and it has come to a point now where it has become, poverty in the Aboriginal community has become generational. We have psychological aspects, psychological abuse aspects that have become generational. When you teach someone, when you take someone out of their household, out of their parents' lives, and then you have religious figures teaching them how to live their lives, beating them, psychologically beating them, and then telling them to raise children, they're going to do the exact same thing that they were taught.
What we were telling Aboriginal people as we try to integrate them into society is that their culture is worthless and that Western culture is superior. I think this is completely ridiculous. Aboriginal and Indigenous groups had almost idealistic forms of government before the Europeans came to North America and other such places. It is ridiculous to assume that our Western democracy should be implemented on them, and the effects of that can be clearly seen.
But you see, that's where the issue of like marginalizing themselves from society comes into play, where Aboriginals, the big issue here is whether they have their rights or not, and like their complete rights as human beings. But the thing is, Aboriginals don't seem to be fully aware of the situation that if they were just to come to be one with society and integrate themselves within society, that their culture would be treated the exact same as other Canadian citizens. Their religions would be just as accepted. Everything would be just the same, and the government would give them the same benefits that all the other Canadian citizens have.
I agree with this, but I agree with what you've said, but I feel as though, you know, there's the saying that they're trying to kill the Indian in the child, which is a terrible thing, and I think that the residential schools, that is a chapter, probably, I think, in my opinion, the darkest chapter in our Canadian history, the one that we should be most ashamed of, that we come to this land that is not ours, that belongs to these Indigenous people, and we take it away from them, we strip them from their land, we strip them from their dignity. However, my main point that I disagree with you, Rajan, on is the fact that they are continuing to be assimilated. And I'll just explain by saying it was an attempt, and actually quite a successful one. It was a horrific thing with the residential schools that they were attempting to assimilate these the Indian people. However, I think that was then, and now it's not because of continued assimilation that they are suffering right now. I think right now
school was closed in the 1970s.
No, 91.
I'm speaking currently.
And currently, 20 years isn't very much a long time.
No,
Sahad, you know what proves the existence of this will to assimilate? What Sahad just brought up, this notion that we have to integrate these people into society and assimilate them, essentially. Integration is like slang for assimilation. I think it's Aboriginal people, they're only, the reserve is their land base, and it's a homeland for them. So you can't equate it to immigrant peoples who have their own homeland that they have come from. They have a cultural base there. Aboriginal peoples need a cultural base somewhere. I think it's completely ridiculous, as demonstrated by the rejection of the white paper in 1969, which I believe the government continues to pursue.
I believe though that this is, you know, it's right now, currently, it's voluntary assimilation, because they're offering, it's terrible, they're offering Indians to sell their land, and often there are such desperate situations that they are the literal slums of Canada. They go for this. They go and say, yes, we will take this offer, and they sell their land. But I think that the way that's voluntary assimilation.
So you think that the government's taking advantage by such loans as in Bill C-35, where the government makes it easier to surrender land. It's voluntary assimilation. Does that make it any more right?
Most-
No, of course not. Of course not.
It's designed by the government.
But the distinction that we need to make, though, is that of course it's not right. Assimilation of any kind is wrong, fundamentally wrong. However, the distinction that we must make is that to give these people back their dignity, back their lands, back their independence, which is ultimately, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, what they're trying to accomplish. They want their independence back. They want their dignity back.
They want acknowledgement.
They want
So
acknowledgement.
in 1969, John Chrétien tried to enforce the White Paper, which pretty much was, he was trying to abolish the Indian Act, and he was trying to provide assimilation of First Nations into the Canadian population. So do you guys think that that is what the government is trying to do?
It's exactly the rejection of this by the Aboriginal people demonstrates that voluntary assimilation, it's not, today voluntary assimilation, it's not like, oh, well, it's not a freedom of choice issue. It's an issue about the government taking advantage of poorly situated peoples to assimilate them. It's no different than forced assimilation. I mean, you could say that people could run away from the people, Indian agents who came to get people off reserves to educate them. So does that make reserves voluntary assimilation?
I agree. Let me
It's
just
like
respond to that.
It's like the idea of having someone come into mainstream society, taking away electricity, taking away Christmas, taking away your television, your iPod, music, and saying that was voluntary.
Yeah.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. And let me clarify. I'm saying what they did is they started the ball rolling. They started a cycle where they got them low. They got them. I understand that. They got them at an alt. They brought them to a low, where they brought them kind of to their knees and to a halt. And so since then, they have never been able to recover. And the generations following the residential schools have been stuck in this vicious, cycle of poverty, abuse, drug abuse, physical, mental, it's sexual abuse. They've been stuck in the cycle. But I think that the key thing that we need to realize here is that to give them back their dignity, to give them back what they want, they've received acknowledgement. They should receive more, I think. But
they should receive more than acknowledgement. They should receive their rights back.
But you see, like, I would like to be clear on something too, that when you guys are misinterpreting the word integration into society. Integration is not fully putting yourself into society and becoming one with society. All it's implying is that you're accepting society in its ways, and that's something that the Aboriginal people just do not do. They do not accept the ways that the Canadian society works around.
Why in which should they decide that who dictates to them that this is what Canadian society is?
But it's just the acceptance.
As I sit here as not a full Aboriginal person, as not an Aboriginal person, I cannot dictate to someone whether or not that is what they need, what they want, because I don't know what they need, I don't know what they want, because I'm not in their situation. What needs to happen is if the government is going to pass bills that involve Aboriginal people, they need to involve Aboriginal Legislative Assembly members, and they need to involve Aboriginal leaders and the Aboriginal people in deciding which bills affect them.
They need to consult Aboriginal peoples as is asked for in the United Nations Declarations of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Sahad, I don't think that we have this myth in Canada that our society is a great mixing bowl, but really it's a factory of assimilation. I think it's, if you look at any third generation person from another country, they're mostly Western. They're not really.
No, but then if you look at the point again that Lane brought up previously about where they say that Canada has been killing the inner Indian out of these children. Now, I don't believe that Canada is actually doing that, and I feel that this is why Canada is halting a little bit on these certain things towards the Aboriginal people, as Canada is probably just afraid at the moment, and what they're trying to do, they're not trying to kill the inner Indian of these children, they're trying to kill the inner Indian that is hating Canada for what they have done in the past, and that is not forgiving.
Let me interject. Let me interject, please, Roger. So anyways, I think that Canada It is our responsibility at this time to acknowledge, again, the mistakes of the past, but not enough to go further and in going and asking, I agree, asking the Aboriginal, Indigenous people what they need to do to help fix their situation, but so that they can give them some hope at the end of a very long and dark tunnel that has been, it's been perpetuated, this cycle, for years and years and years.
I agree with that, but Sahad, do you think that for Palestine and Israel, do you think Palestine, the Palestinians, should integrate into Israeli society?
But then if you also look at the fact that when all of the immigrants come into Canada, but they integrate, sometimes they don't even integrate themselves completely. They just accept the values of Canada.
You come to Canada.
The rest of the world has, we have come to them, Sahad. So,
but they have chose to stay.
Do you think a two-state solution for Palestine and Israel is not the right way to go? Do you think the Palestinians should integrate into Israeli society? Because that's ultimately the same question.
I don't think that's what anyone's saying.
But what Sahad is saying is that you should integrate Aboriginal peoples into
See, what's happening
society.
right now is that, as you mentioned, Canada is known as the big salad bowl. Now, with all these cultures, now, yes, we're all inside the same salad bowl, but we're all different parts of the salad bowl. What the Aboriginals are doing to the salad bowl, are they're saying that no, we don't want to be part of the salad bowl, we want to be just outside of the salad bowl to deserve the same rights that these ones are getting, but we still want to make sure that we're separate.
The difference is, as Garrison pointed out, people have come to Canada. It's just like, my analogy was Israel and Palestine. The Israelis came to Palestine.
You have chosen to enter into a culture and accept a culture and a society in order to be a part of it. These Aboriginal people have not done
being
that.
forced
You
upon
guys are all
them.
making really strong points. We are just going to continue on the topic of assimilation. So, Rajan, you have the floor before we take our break.
So, as I was saying before, what we really need to do is focus on assimilation, and as the Royal Charter for Indigenous Peoples stated before, we have to make these governments things like national. So basically, what it said is we should develop 3 different types of Aboriginal governance structures. So you have sort of public structures, so that's sort of like Nunavut, right, where they're sort of integrated with the public more, and then there's for reserves there needs to be sort of more traditional governance structures that are loosely federally associated. And then also what the Royal Charter says is that we need to have urban Aboriginal groups that maintain culture in urban areas.
I think what we need to do is we need to honor the treaties that were signed originally. We look at it and we have a government who does not honor those treaties. We have Montreal, Aboriginal land, legally as Aboriginal land. We can't destroy Aboriginal the idea, but you have to at least give compensation for what was done. At that time of what it was.
Yeah, we have to
It's
revive culture.
It's funny how you mentioned though, you mentioned with Nunavut, you mentioned integration. You mentioned integration.
Well, integrated government, but
integrated government. This means
mean,
regardless of how you look at it, regardless of how you look at it, gentlemen, please. Regardless of how you look at it, there needs to be there's not going to, yes, we want an independence of culture, but they're not going to achieve this on their own. They need government's help.
I extremely disagree.
You disagree? You think that
it can't be a government initiative.
I think the Aboriginal.
I agree. It needs to be a First Nation initiative. But we have these leaders. It needs to be their initiative, and it needs to be their input. But they can't do it alone.
But you also have to see how the world works. With we've brought up the point that Canada's government isn't honoring its treaties towards the Aboriginal community. But what the Aboriginal community is also doing is they're negotiating for more rights, more than they first wanted. So when a negotiation is happening, everyone has to lower, one side has to higher their standards, one person has to lower it. And this is just how negotiations work. This is how difficulties come to be. And so, yes, it will be a big fight.
Happy,
but
the fact that when before the bill that is presently in place that dictates who continues to have Aboriginal status in the land, it was by the father's line, by the government standard. They did not know anything about Aboriginal culture until, because they didn't know that traditionally Aboriginal culture, the bloodline follows the mother's side of the family.
And so they enforced this patriarchy, this patriarchy governance structure that is completely against what Aboriginal beliefs are, and it's still happening today. These established things are still happening today, and I would think Garrison brings up a really good point when he says that they went in and sort of said, okay, your status, you're not, you're Métis, you're this.
By blood.
Yes.
Depending on how much blood you had in your body, that was considered Aboriginal blood. Even though you could live a completely traditional Aboriginal life, you were not granted Aboriginal status.
Or if a woman married, an Aboriginal woman married a white man, or of any other culture, she'd lose her status, and so would her children. I
agree that I think that the government and they started this. They started this. They started this. They came in not being culturally aware in the slightest, and they came in and asserted all their rules, all their beliefs and their values. But since then, they integrated them. But the Native people since then, since that's been all that some Native people have known, they've perpetuated them. I think at this point, if we just left it up to them, think about it. If we left it just up to the Native people, we offered them nothing. If the government offered them nothing, if we just left it to them to fix their own circumstances, how is that? They're not going to fix their own circumstances.
But the fact is not whether or not they need the government to do this. What it is that the government did not do what they said they were going to do.
I agree.
And the fact is not, it is not that Aboriginal people cannot handle their own affairs, because they can. And they have for thousands of years before the government.
So the government has recognized their mistakes, and they are currently providing money. Do you guys think that that's helping, or do you think that
money doesn't do anything?
Money is not the solution. The solution should be it should be put in place in terms of programs, in terms of education. But then, wait, if we do that, then that means that we're trying to integrate our beliefs on them.
And that's
how are we
exactly
going to do that?
It needs to be undesignated money. If we start giving money and say, okay, this has to be for this has to be for this.
Have you seen what's
But
happened with undesignated money? It has been
it.
wasted. It has been not improperly.
You know, Aboriginals right now sell the most cigarettes in the world.
Okay.
They're doing what if they were part of the Canadian society? They would be doing illegal acts.
Hold on, yeah, the money that so far, the money that has been given, which is small, I grant you,
okay.
It is small. The money that has been given has been improperly spent. They need some, they need some form of regulation, and I would say, I agree. I agree. They can take care of their own affairs. They have done so. They have done so for years. Garrison is right, for thousands of years. But these two, like a few generations, have been pushed down and hit when they're down and hit when they're down, and they are in this cycle that they just cannot recover from. They have lost their dignity, they have lost their respect. We need to give that back to them, but we can't just throw money at them.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. There are citizens who are pro-stabilization of the Aboriginal lives, but then there's also the citizens who do not feel that it is necessary because they see the misuse of the money that the government has given them. What do you think?
I honestly personally think that the people who look at the Aboriginal people and say that they don't deserve this because of the misuse of money given by the government, I think that's quite ignorant from my perspective. I think that you need to look at the hardships in which the Aboriginal people have gone through before you can make anything, even talk about what it is.
No,
the Aboriginal people, give me 1 second here. The Aboriginal people have been oppressed for hundreds of years. Not until 20 years ago, as we found out today, was the government actually even stopping something that had been happening for hundreds of years. Oppression, abuse, okay? Now, when the government, honestly, it just shows the government doesn't know it just shows it, it proves that the government knows absolutely nothing about Aboriginal people when you just throw them money, okay? You don't throw someone money and say, go and do something with it.
So what
But see,
solution,
that's
what
so
you-
what
what you
solution
need to
would
do-
you
what
implement?
you would
What
need to
solution
do
would you implement?
is I would educate Aboriginal people so that they can come back and fix their own society.
And how
But
would
when
they-
does education lead to the integration of Canadian
No.
beliefs and
No.
values?
Well,
towards
there's
the
plenty.
Aboriginals?
There are educated Aboriginal people out there.
I
It's not
agree.
like
It's
okay.
not.
And what I just like to address something. If we bring in all these financial auditors and like check that the corruption isn't like.
Why don't we do
especially-
that for the government? Why don't we
Why-
have financial auditors
why-
come in and check Stephen Harper's paycheck over here?
and especially in
I think she's not with
Attawapiskat,
that.
it wasn't that there's this thing about I think 85% of it went undocumented or something. It's not that it was corrupt; it was undocumented. I think that should be really noticed.
No, but then there's also the saying that someone needs to carry the hammer. And in this sort of society, there needs to be regulations on a society so small and that
In the
clearly
beginning,
doesn't
in the
have
beginning.
enough money to keep itself moving
have a
along
question.
just as Canadian society is.
So again here, if
By
you say
having-
it's the beginning, then what you're saying again is you just proved that the government did not do their due diligence in making sure that the Aboriginal money that was being given was spent properly.
Of
So
course
it's not
so.
the, it's not the
Aboriginals-
Aboriginal
Of
people's
course they
fault.
did. It is.
The
I
government.
agree that
It's
it's
the
the
government's
government's.
problem
It's
yet
the
again.
government's fault. It is. But as Rajan would say, have you believe, we should give it. It should be unregulated. It should just be thrown at them.
Not
not
necessarily
exactly, no.
completely unregulated. I'm just saying that there should be all these conditions on them, like
You
you have to
don't-
develop this first, and then you
Yes.
have to
You
develop.
don't know-
They should be given more
You
freedom.
don't know
not
what needs to
necessarily-
happen first. You don't
Do
need to
you-
know what happens.
Garrison,
I'm
Well,
gonna
hold on,
interrupt
Lane.
Lane. Have respect to your fellow candidates. Do you guys believe that Aboriginals are overrepresented in crime and the misuse of money and not enough light is shed
Definitely.
on their poor standards of living?
But I think their poor standards of living are also highlighted in the media. It's their poor standards of living and their high crime rates and high drug trade and stuff. It's sort of like how black people in America have been marginalized. I think that really what the media needs to do is focus on aspects of progress in Aboriginal culture rather than, oh, look how bad
The
they are.
negatives.
Let's pity them.
I agree.
Let's pity their society.
That's a
We-
self-fulfilling
So
prophecy.
do
we
you
need to
guys
help
think
them.
that the government is trying to help in, our government is acting in the way that they know their
No.
society,
No,
rather than the way that the Aboriginals live in their society and their
No,
culture?
they're portraying. I agree with Rajan. I think they're portraying all negative. And if an Aboriginal were to look at this, it would be a depressing situation indeed. They do need to focus on the positives, because although I'd say at this point the negatives far outnumber the positives, they need to have some hope going forward. I just wanted to address the point that Garrison made regarding education. If we give money towards education, how would we not implement our beliefs? How is it possible to not
I'll
implement
say-
our beliefs?
I'll say
on
something to
there?
that. Okay, so we have the Meech Lake Accord. It would have went through and destroyed the culturalistic ideals of Aboriginal people. If one man did not stand up, who was an educated Aboriginal man, that would have been passed. That man stood up, he was educated, he was an Aboriginal, and he had it not passed.
You're not answering my
And what I'm
question.
saying is that when you invest in the education of Aboriginal people, they will then become the social workers. They will then become the teachers.
And
And they will
can
then
I
become
answer
the
this?
leaders, well, listen, that will come back to their communities and embrace their communities' cultures and traditions to teach people how to live better lives.
I agree, but how both? I'll propose this to you both. How do you both suggest that we do this? How do you suggest that I agree, education
Cultural-based
is the key.
Cultural-based
education. As a person who is half Aboriginal, I would like to say that I believe in giving more elders who were traditional teachers in Aboriginal culture more say in the education.
Yeah.
So we have culture, and we have essentially an unassimilation.
But
so
then
that
there's also-
Aboriginal people can regain their self-confidence
When
and
you
say
get
that
the elders,
I'm proud of my
the-
culture.
When you get the traditional values coming in, yes, it is good to keep your traditions, your traditional values in play. But then there's also the aspect that these elders, these traditional thinkers, are also the people who hated on Canadian citizens and the Canadian government.
It's not hate.
So-
It's not hate. What they hate is the oppression.
Yeah.
It's
I
not the
agree with
government,
that.
it's not the people. They hate the oppression.
They hated being downtrodden when this was, it to them, I don't know, but to them, I would assume that the feeling would be one of rage, helpless rage, because here's this bigger, more powerful body of people coming in, taking their lands. But here,
I don't think at all. I don't think anything is rage. There's the highest suicide rate.
Anger.
The highest suicide rate among people in Canada is the Aboriginal population, and it's not because they're angry. It's
why?
because they're depressed. It's because they've been marginalized. It's because they've been oppressed.
Okay.
And by saying that they are angry at the government, that they're angry at the
They
Canadian
should
people,
be.
we're enraging and instilling fear in the Canadian population, thus marginalizing the Aboriginal people even more.
To suggest that there's no sentiment of rage, perhaps rage and perhaps, one of desperation. I think both are equally as, present. But I feel it's not going to instill fear in the Canadian population.
I believe it is.
I don't think it is at all. I think that what it should do is it should make it should make us feel shame. It should make Canada's tone should be apologetic. We should recognize we were in the wrong. But to help them, we need not just here's the solution. We need not just throw money towards them, say, you are an independent people, you are a strong, you are an independent nation, you take this money, you take it, and do with it what you will. You're independent, you can make your own choices. This is for us, our wrongs that we have done to you.
But we
They're
never
not going to
said
build
there was
that.
never to be regulation.
Yeah,
Money
we
doesn't
just
stop.
We just don't want to have them. Okay, you have to do your education in this manner.
I'm not suggesting a
No, he's
re-assimilation.
suggesting that you just give them the money and let them do what they want.
We never
But then-
suggested that.
But then, see, if you just give them the money and let them do what they want, number one, they can use it wrongly. Number two,
Perhaps I missed.
doing such things, doing things like this,
Yes.
which you're marginalizing them as another nation, is basically saying that UN missions, NATO missions, all such missions are wrong because these missions have the all in all same objective as Canada has towards the Aboriginals.
I would just like to address one of your earlier points first, Sahad. You said that by letting elders participate in Aboriginal education, you think that would foster hatred, and
I don't feel
I frankly find that sort of offensive.
I think they need to stay with curriculum. They will
No,
stay
but
with
then we
curriculum,
need to instill
but have
culture
cultural, yes.
and begin a process of unissimilation. I think that to say that since someone was oppressed, that we can't let them teach their traditional values.
I
can teach their values.
think that is an erroneous notion.
Canada is known as a peacekeeping nation and provides support to Africa and the Middle East and Europe. But how can we do that when we can't even help our own?
Do we have time for this, or should we continue?
We can continue. We have time.
We have time. Okay.
We have a few more.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So Canada is able to provide help and support and aid and relief to all these developing countries that are in detrimental situations, but we're doing that, but we're not taking into consideration our own problems and our own societies and communities within our own country. We're just giving them money, and do you guys believe that we need to go about in the way where we're saying providing them, but we're also helping them. We're teaching them how
No,
to.
but see,
Instead of just handing them money, do you guys think that we should personally go into their communities, into their societies, help them, have them teach us, and also so we can learn from them, but they can learn from us.
But see, that also comes to a problem because see, when you talk about going into other countries and helping them out, now number one, most of these countries hardly appreciate it until the solution is resolved.
But do you
now,
guys,
when it comes to Aboriginals, by going into their societies, Aboriginals will not accept this at all, and this is going against treaties that we have signed with
but do you guys believe that
I-
Canada isn't taking into
Yes,
consideration their culture?
Canada is not taking any consideration in their culture. The government, the way with them putting money towards this is they're trying to push it under the carpet and leave it. Forget about it. What we need to do is we cannot just send 7 social workers, 7 white male social workers into an Aboriginal community and say, fix the problem. What we need to do is we need to send 7 Aboriginal social workers into the community to talk with them and teach them the traditional aspect. They have things where what you do, there's traditions in Aboriginal culture in certain bands where you actually go into the forest, into the woods for weeks at a time, and you rejuvenate. You cleanse yourself of the depression.
I gotta interrupt. You guys have all had some very strong points, but so welcome back. Clearly, we have had a lot of heated discussion. We've had a lot of strong topics. So we decided to continue, and I just want to start it off with, what do you guys think of the opportunities that the government has provided Aboriginals for education, whether it be post-secondary education or just high school?
Well, I'm happy that you asked that, Sharon, because I think that right now, currently as it stands, there are opportunities in place for Aboriginals post-secondary. I think that the cost of university, should they move on, is substantially less. But I think that it's almost a bit of a joke, because many, more than not, Aboriginals are not able to capitalize on this. They're not able to take advantage of this, because most of them don't end up going to post-secondary education. They don't. So we need to figure out what's wrong earlier in the link, earlier in the chain. We need to figure out what weak is linked before post-secondary education, so that we can fix this, and so that we can have more educated Aboriginals, have more educated Indigenous people that can act as examples for their own kind, for their own people.
That comes back to the same idea. First of all, the government of Canada would not provide funding, free education for Aboriginal people if they didn't capitalize on it, okay? Because they wouldn't have enough money to be able to provide free education for all Aboriginal people in Canada. Period. That's why it's available to Aboriginal.
And that's why the band councils are allowed to hand out a certain number of grants, not just in the
exactly. So the other idea is that what is the problem behind this? And I think it comes down to the people who are in the communities themselves. We're having people who are coming in who have no kind of background idea of what it is that that is going on in that community. We have people who come from different cultures, different societies in Canada, that are coming in and trying to teach these people how to be educated, or Canadian, right? What we need is Aboriginal people from the get-go. We need to start funding Aboriginal people, the elders, to come into the classroom and to teach. We need to start funding people of minority, we need people who are in the same situation as the Aboriginal people need to come in, and they need to provide their insights on how education will get you places, will help you get better paying.
We need a revival of culture.
On that note, do you guys feel that more people who are, say, a quarter Aboriginal or an eighth Aboriginal, who are not living directly on the reserve, are taking advantage of these opportunities, rather than the people who are living on the reserve and have experienced the detrimental education system?
Well, I think that essentially the thing is, it's not about how much your blood is. It's about how connected to the Aboriginal community you actually are.
But do you feel that more people out of the reserves are taking advantage rather than?
Yes, of course. Like at the reserves, conditions. I think the conditions in the reserves are more desperate than the conditions outside the reserve. So I would say yes, but it shouldn't be that way. They should make it so that both outside of reserve, natives, and inside of reserve natives have equal opportunity. I actually don't think it should be how connected to the community they are, because I think part of the reason some of them choose not to be connected with the community is because of the history. They know, so they try to get out of this situation, out of this circle by coming out of the community.
But why should Aboriginal people have to leave their reserves in order to get education? And that's what the government needs to respond to.
What Lane was saying earlier about Aboriginal people taking advantage outside the community, I'm not sure if that's really true, because the tax exemptions are largely on reserve. If you have a business, usually, especially in Six Nations, you set it up on reserve because you get tax benefits because of that. So I think that the reason
about education.
Yeah, I think there's just opportunities everywhere. Yeah. It's just which opportunities you choose to take.
People who get there's plenty of marginalized, sort of poverty-ridden people, Aboriginal people in cities and towns too, especially in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon, and such places.
Winnipeg.
It's but the reason why it appears that some Aboriginals have capitalized on it is because Aboriginals leave reserves to get educated, and those who get educated ultimately are more successful.
I think they decentralize in that manner because there's this certain reputation, and it's not without a valid reason that the reserves are not good, if not the place to be if you want to receive an education. I think that is a large aspect of why the culture is being lost, which I 100% agree that the culture should be maintained, it should be nourished, it should be preserved, but I think that we need to fix these people. I agree, sure, there might be poor people, poor Aboriginals that are living off reserves, but I think comparably, Aboriginals that are off reserves, generally, they will capitalize more on the post-secondary than those in reserves. I think that's for a reason.
I don't think so. I think that I think you fail to see the fact that in order for an Aboriginal person to want to go to post-secondary education, they have to make it through elementary and secondary school on a reserve. And the aspect that there is more than a 50% dropout rate in Aboriginal, not just in reserves
for Aboriginal people.
For Aboriginal people in general. So there's a higher than a 50% dropout rate, and that is what we need to look at. And because most reserves do not have secondary schools, they're going off reserve to the secondary schools, which then subsequently puts them in another oppressive position because there's racism in the school. There's oppression by the government in the school. They're not learning culturally based education. They are not provided with the means that they need in order to get there. And that comes back to our education reform that we were talking about. As many Aboriginal people have learning disabilities because of the generational aspects of poverty, abuse, and oppression. So now we have Aboriginal people who are facing oppression and abuse and racism in a school where they can't even learn because the options for them learning aren't provided to them.
But see, that's where I think where modern culture comes into play. People need to learn that, see, it's not just the Aboriginals that have to leave their nation to receive a good education. People in other countries usually come to the United States, to Canada, to receive a good...
It's irrelevant.
No, they come here to receive a good education. Do they keep their culture? Do they keep their religion? Yes, they do. It's all about multicultural.
So, do they have to come to Canada to get a secondary school? Sure, some countries don't have second high schools, but really, it's sort of ridiculous to say it's uncomparable because we live in a first world country, and for you to have to travel off your cultural basis, which is supposed to be part of a first world country, is sort of.
But see, that's where the acceptance comes into play.
But why should Aboriginal people have to accept what Canadian society has granted them?
In terms
of education, in terms of whatever Canadian society demands of Aboriginal
they
society.
shouldn't, but that's what needs, I think.
But that's not what needs to happen. Canadian society needs to accept Aboriginal society.
What needs to happen is education on reserves, period. That needs to happen. We all agree on this point.
So they need money.
They need money, but they also need some form of regulation. I have a question for you, Garrison, on your point. You said 50%, there's a 50% dropout rate. Does that tell us how many people of that rate? Does that tell us how many people are from reserves versus how many people are off reserves?
It doesn't matter.
I just want to raise a point on what Lane said. You are saying that you need education on the reserves, but do you guys feel that would work? Because from what I see, that they're not even motivated to get post-secondary education off the reserve or education before post-secondary education. What makes you think that they will be motivated enough to receive education if they're on their own grounds?
Post-secondary, I can understand being off reserve because reserves are generally pretty small communities. But I think secondary schools, so high schools, it's essential that they are on reserves. I mean, Lane keeps bringing up the point about how Aboriginal people's off reserves are better than those on reserves, but especially where their populations are dense, such as in Saskatoon, they just sort of become this marginalized group that are
They're
subject
the
to
drunks,
heavy,
they're the drug addicts, they're the...
subject to heavy racism.
Based on what? Based on what information do you
on
have?
data. Based on data.
In Winnipeg,
What
there's
data?
more
So if
Aboriginal
you're saying
people
it's
in
all
jail
based on
cells.
data, does that mean it's not
Where is
true?
your
No,
proof?
I'm
Where's
that's
your
not what I'm
back?
saying.
How
Data
can
is
you back
the
up
majority
your
of
argument?
the biggest ethnic group in prisons are Aboriginal people.
Correct.
But that
So
doesn't
maybe they're doing
discriminate.
something
That
wrong.
doesn't distinct. That does not. It doesn't define whether it's not distinct whether they're from the reserve
but
or
it
from
doesn't
outside.
matter.
Saskatoon
What
was named
matters?
the most dangerous city in all of North America because of its Aboriginal.
What
Has-
matters is how, it doesn't matter if they're on reserves or they're off reserves. What matters is whether or not they're receiving the education that they are, that, to me, I think education is a right, is an essential right in Canada.
Of course it is.
And it doesn't matter whether or not it's off reserve or on reserve, is that those people are not getting the education granted to them. Whether or not it's their own decision, they don't have the motivation based off of historical aspects.
What Raja brought up was that in prisons, the highest rate is Aboriginal people. So does that fall back on the way that our society treated them in the past, the way our government treated them?
Yes, of course it does. It's
Poverty.
It's poverty, but I think that, you know, in education and being in is the key is being in a conducive environment to learning. I think
So you're saying schools on reserves are not conducive?
I feel as though they're with the it's 100%.
Have you visited a reserve?
No, but it is 100% Aboriginal population. Yes, on reserves. Outside of reserves, it is not 100%, where the dropout rate is much less. Therefore, I would stipulate that their motivation, they're surrounded by people.
Who are they dropping out because they have a poor education system?
Especially because
It's examples all around
in
them.
communities where large amounts of Aboriginal populations exist, especially in the West, these schools aren't accepting of them. They have downright racist sort of attitudes, and it's
I travel to Aboriginal reserves quite frequently during the summertime, and this summer I was in Cape Croker Reserve, it's just outside of Tobermory, and I went into the reserve and I was in the schools, and the schools are extremely underfunded. Okay, this school that I was in, it had the insulation was falling from the ceiling. The school board was an old bungalow, an old house, a bungalow, where they only had 1 or 2 people working in it because the government did not provide them with enough money to facilitate education. And the aspect is that what you need to do is you need to create buildings that promote proper education. Like in most Aboriginal cultures, corners in a room trap spirits. Okay? People don't understand that in Aboriginal culture, just like the Museum of Civilization in Ottawa, actually has been, there's no cornered walls. Every wall is round, okay? Keeping with Aboriginal culture. When you have a government come in and not know about how to educate Aboriginal people, they create buildings like that. They create an atmosphere that is not conducive to your learning that you were talking about.
I think the shape of the buildings is
irrelevant.
I don't think it is.
It's
It's absolutely not irrelevant. It's just like saying, okay, well,
should that be our focus?
Arab architecture
focus?
doesn't matter at all.
Exactly.
So
you know, what we have to do is we have to start from the very beginning. We have to talk to Aboriginal people and say, we are going to provide you with the money and the necessary tools you need to promote education in the community. How will you do it? And they give us plans. They give the government plans, and then the government lets them do it. You have to have Aboriginal people do it.
I think you have to have Aboriginal people initiate it. I 100% agree. But in this will help. I think this will help seal the. I think this will help heal wounds that have been in place, and perhaps you know, Indigenous people are still resentful. I think this would help heal wounds if we didn't just give them the money and say, well, what are you going to do with it? Here you go, you do it. I think this should be a collaborative effort. This should be Canada. This should be Canada sitting down and listening to the Aboriginal people.
Why is it Canada who says yes or no to what the Aboriginal?
Why is it?
It's not them.
Yeah,
It's
but
not
then
them
there's
saying
also
yes
the
or no.
Aboriginal saying
It's
no
them
to
saying.
us.
It's them
No,
saying.
when is Aboriginal
No,
people
because
ever
they're,
saying no to the
just
government?
as your example said, that if Canada were to go and say, here's some money, what are you going to do with it? Canada has made
it's
such
putting
efforts, and
restrictions
they
on
have
us and putting-
they have
disagree.
gone to Aboriginals and said, "We'll give you money. Okay, what are you going to do with this?"
Does the
These
government
recent
need to
bills
put restrictions on the
are
money we give
blatant
them?
examples that
They-
that is
But they're
completely
only
false.
spending it on, they're not spending it on
I'm
the
not
government
saying,
has
I'm
recommended for
not,
them
I'm
to
not
spend it on.
saying that there shouldn't
the
be,
track record.
there shouldn't be regulations on how the money is spent. Maybe what we need to do is say, here's $30 million that needs to go towards education. And then,
That's what I'm
and
saying.
then,
That's a
and then-
regulation.
But the thing is not us, them saying, hey, the Canadian government saying, okay, I'll listen to you, and then the Aboriginals giving you, here's the paper, we need $30 million for this, and saying,
Yeah.
oh, you know what, we can't build that building because that building's $3 million and it has round corners. If we knock it down to $2 million because we can get straight, we can get 90-degree angle corners.
This is not.
That-
This shouldn't be the focus.
Okay,
of
No,
our
but what I'm saying is that
conversation.
the
Should be
Canadian government over centuries has lacked the ability to listen to the Aboriginal people to what they need. What they need
So let's
in order to progress their own traditions and societies.
Let's-
If we
let's come
said,
to an
if we
agreement.
said,
I think what me and Garrison are saying is that we don't want unregulated money, but we'll say, okay, here's some money for education. How are you going to use it? And
Exactly.
that is what needs to be done. If that plan, I don't think it should be a
But see,
collaborative
that's
effort where the
when
government is.
undocumented
What-
spending comes
No,
into play.
no, that they give you okay, you say, oh, here's money to spend on education. How are you going to use it? They give you a plan, and
I-
give
okay,
you-
So, do you
And
guys
I don't think it
believe
should be.
that the government should give money to their societies rather than individuals?
well, they never give it to
They
you.
never give it to
They never
individuals.
do.
It's just
In
society.
order, unless you're getting money from the government for certain aspects of your life,
Yeah.
then that is just the same as giving someone on disability money, giving someone on welfare money, giving someone on employment insurance money. What needs to happen is the Canadian government needs to sit down with the Aboriginal people. They need to say that this is the money that we are offering to give you. We need a plan in order from you of what we need. It's just like you don't go into an African.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but
Can I just make one more point
no, we're out
before
of time.
before
I
we
apologize.